Hi, Chase. How are you?
I'm great.
I'm so happy you're here. Chase Palmieri from Credder, among other things, right?
Yep.
But we're going to talk mostly about Credder. Is it Credder or Credder.com officially?
Officially, it's Credder Inc.
Credder Inc.
But underneath the umbrella, we have Credder.com as one product, but we refer to it as Credder.
Credder. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm also a little bit intimidated.
Don't be.
Here's why. Because I know you not super well, but well enough that, we've had a few social occasions to hang out. And you're a smarty pants. You're a little bit of a smarty pants. And I mean that in the best way. So Sometimes when I think all the people who know everything about all the news, I'm afraid to say anything and this is perfect conversation for you, because I never know how credible I am. Because I never know how credible the information that I'm consuming is. Mm-hmm. And because I don't take the time to dive in deep and really kind of research the source. And I'm like probably half of America right now. And it's like, oh, fuck, you can't even believe what you're reading. So I just don't do it. And then I sit next to people like you who know everything about everything. And I'm like, oh, man, I can't even hold a conversation with these people. Tell me how Credder came about.
Credder came about mostly it began with my personal frustration with the media and kind of taking a look at what happens when journalism moves online and has to kind of conform to the ad-based revenue model of online media. And I was looking at it and starting to see kind of an increase in clickbait and sensationalism back in 2016, and decided, well, this is only going to get worse and worse because these companies are going to have to focus more and more on going after these metrics of clicks and likes and shares and all these kind of vanity metrics, kind of how we refer to them. And we saw, well, this is going to just kind of become a race to the bottom for journalism, and we need to try to create a way without censoring content to create an incentive for credibility and high quality journalism, and try to find maybe a middleman that can serve as kind of a Rotten Tomatoes or Yelp and redirect people's traffic towards better quality.
Okay. So the redirecting traffic part is the important part, right? It's one thing for somebody to realize that a piece of news that they're reading may not be credible, but having the incentive to move in a direction where they're going to actually get the real story or the correct story or the deeper story is ideal.
Yeah.
As opposed to me, who's just like, oh, screw this, I give up.
Yeah. What we're trying to do is, it's kind of a two-facing business not a two-faced business, but a two-facing business, in that we're working with the news consumers, but we're also working with the authors and outlets. And so for the news consumers, our goal is to help them find the most reputable, trustworthy piece of content on whatever story they're looking to inform themselves on, and kind of really shorten the time it takes to, really get informed on any subject by going straight to the best article. But then on the news producer side, we're trying to create this incentive for quality and kind of the disincentive to make them think twice about just pushing out a piece of clickbait or sensationalism, because now, well, you might want to think twice, because that's going to hurt your score. That's going to hurt your rating page, your reputation.
Right. And is this the first, like you just mentioned Rotten Tomatoes, so we have kind of that situation for movies, right? Is this the first platform on the news side that has come about? Are you the first? Are you blazing trails here?
We are. There was something, I'm forgetting the name of it, but about 8 years ago, it was just way too early. I'm forgetting the name of that platform. But there was something that, like 8 years ago, that tried this very briefly, didn't find much traction, and turned it over. But yeah, when we were looking at this problem and the solution that we wanted as news consumers, which was, well, just if news moved online, and the benefit of being online is that we're all connected, then let's connect news consumers so that we can start working together and start to help each other find the quality news, instead of, so more of an empowerment as opposed to censorship. And so when we were looking for a solution, originally we weren't thinking, oh, here's a company, here's an idea, let's go for it. It was, I want to be able to do this. This seems like the ideal way to be able to gather news in the 21st century. Where is it? Who's doing it? I want to use it. And then when we scoured the internet for 3 weeks and none of us could find anything close to it, that's when we decided, well, if nobody else is doing it, nobody's even talking about doing it, maybe we should do it.
That's kind of scary. I mean, it's amazing and scary. There's so many people who sit around, I'm one of them sometimes, who has like a list of all of the great ideas or the problems that you want to solve. And not many people dive in and think, all right, well, I'm going to solve this. But before Credder, what was your background?
So I was going to school. I got my degree in entrepreneurship. So I'm one of those people that has a running list of business ideas and never ending.
One of those big giant sticky Post-it notes on your board.
Yeah,
on your wall.
It actually is more of like a flip book kind of thing that I would have to have by the side of my bed because I couldn't sleep. I'd have to, if something hit me in the middle of the night, I'd kind of have to wake up and write it down so that I could put my mind at ease and go back to sleep. But
does that work actually?
It did. It does. It did. It does for me.
I don't know.
It's the only thing that worked for me. Otherwise, I would actually write them down in the dark, try to do it without even turning the lights on. So sometimes they were unlegible. But yeah, that was my background. I have a little bit of background in the restaurant business, as you know, with Risibisi here in Petaluma. Mm-hmm. That's actually where I became incredibly familiar with Yelp and watched over a 13-year period how Yelp drastically changed the restaurant industry.
Oh, for sure.
For some folks for the better, for some for the worst. I think for consumers and restaurant goers in general, for the better. Because it's made restaurant owners and staff really pay attention to their behavior because all of a sudden their name might get written out in a review and then their boss is going to have a word with them. And so there became this accountability in the restaurant space for the first time. And that is kind of really the genesis of the Credder story. It was me working with that on behalf of our restaurant and responding to reviews on a regular basis and just seeing how our behavior even changed as we started to realize, okay, we're accountable. We can either take this seriously or do what a lot of restaurants, probably most restaurants did, which was just ignore it and hope that it would go away. But it didn't. And the restaurants that took it seriously and kind of leaned into Yelp have benefited with more traffic. And so that's kind of the model we're trying to replicate.
All right, so let's dive into the Yelp thing really quick before we circle back to Credder, because I have several friends in town who have restaurants, and we are also on Yelp, and it's a little bit of a different thing for us. I don't think we have the challenges that the restaurants have, but as a consumer, as a friend of restaurateurs, I hear the frustrations, and there are legitimate frustrations. There are just people out there who feel like they're just having a bad day. They're not really leaving a productive review. And unfortunately, that can hurt your restaurant, right? Like some guy just had who knows? Sometimes the reviews are legit. So I hear that side. But as a consumer, and I don't know if it's that my opinion is colored now by these anecdotes, but I don't believe in if I go, whatever, Yelp restaurant near me or whatever, I'm only doing it for information. It's my yellow pages. I don't believe a damn thing that I read on there. And I will look at the photos. So if they're good photos, but honestly, because I feel like there's a lot of douchey people out there who just live to say negative things about business owners. So even as a consumer, I'm like, but is this really that great? Or is it really that bad? This guy probably just had a bad day. So do you think it's possible that on the news side that this is going to be a thing as well? I mean, I guess anything's possible, but how do you eliminate that?
Yeah, so this was a very obvious concern of ours from the ground up in the very early days, at the point when we were still calling ourselves tribe-worthy, and we were much more of an experiment in our apartment with me and my fellow co-founders. And what we were trying to do was actually create a different review process, a review process specific for news, one that would hopefully pull the most objective critique out of the reviewer as possible. We hear the concerns with Yelp. In fact, it's usually the first thing people bring up when we call ourselves a Yelp for news consumers, which is why we actually tend to call ourselves the Rotten Tomatoes for news. I'm not sure which one we're actually more like, but people seem to respond better to the Rotten Tomatoes for news for whatever branding reasons. Yeah. But yeah, restaurant owners are frustrated, but it's also kind of a natural thing when all of a sudden your baby is being held accountable and you're like, well, who are you? I built this restaurant from nothing. Who are you to tell me that, the pasta came out cold or that the dish wasn't served right? You don't know how the dish was supposed to be served. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's consumers' feedback. And I think a smart restaurant owner is going to not worry so much about the negative reviews and how it impacts their business, but use it as feedback. Like, okay, whether I agree or not, somebody's saying that the pasta came out cold. Maybe we should think about serving the pasta on a plate that is warmed up a little bit so it stays warm longer. There's a lot of things that you can actually learn if you're willing to kind of turn off your ego and your pride and just take the feedback for what it is. And that feedback is something that nobody in the journalism space is getting right now, right? There's zero accountability. In fact, a lot of them have been turning off their comment sections. So it's just there's a big gap that we're trying to fill, which is that when you read the news, not everybody has a take on it or a critique on every article. But if you do, right now, there's nothing for you to do about it. And to us, that's the missed opportunity that we're trying to gather up. Right. And I think ultimately, you can say that you don't use Yelp for the ratings, and it could be true. But at the end of the day, there are enough people who find it helpful, right? And so I don't think that Yelp is hurting businesses. I think it might be neutral, and it might not be helping certain businesses that aren't getting great ratings. But I think no matter what, in general, it's been good for the restaurant industry, and especially good for independent, smaller restaurants. So the kind of example I like to use when discussing Yelp and how it translates to Credder is that when you were going to go out for breakfast, let's say 20 years ago, you would go to Denny's or an IHOP, especially if you're in an area you weren't familiar with. Why? Because you knew the brand. Right. You have some sense of reputation that's attached to the brand. But with Yelp, all of a sudden now you can look and you can find that mom and pop breakfast spot that you never would have found. It's a magical, amazing experience that you would never have otherwise found. And the only reason you found it is because Yelp became the reputation holder for that restaurant. And it actually created that level playing field where IHOP and Denny's now have to compete with these great mom and pop breakfast spots. And I don't know if you've seen, but Denny's and IHOP haven't really been able to get their act together. Yeah. And so the traffic has moved from those places, those kind of chains, to the mom and pops. And that's the same thing we see in news today. Everybody gets their news from the top, 8 to 10 sources, whatever they are, the mainstream outlets. I don't even need to say them. You're already thinking of them in your head. And those are the brands. And so not only do we want to create a level playing field where smaller independent outlets can create news and have traffic come to them based on quality, but also what we see as the future is where the authors themselves are the brands, right? So right now when an author writes, all they get is this little black and white byline. And then 2 years later, they might go work for another outlet. And so everything they did to create brand trust is captured and stays with the outlet that they were just working for. And they don't have a way of, carrying their audience over or carrying their reputation or trust over. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do. And the way we look at it is, look, you might not love what we're doing. It might not be for you, but ultimately we don't see how this hurts. We only see this as a net positive because we are empowering news consumers. We're getting feedback to the journalists and outlets. And like you said, where you go to the pages for information, every single one of our authors, outlets, and articles has this kind of IMDb style page where you can look at all the background info, all the outlets they've ever worked at, all the articles they've ever written and the topics. And if you don't want to look at the rating, then that's fine. But we do have info for you that gives you insight into the sources. Right.
That for me is what warms my heart about the whole project. So, I mean, there's a lot of great things that are coming out of Credder, but just based on the work that I do, right? I have this beautiful space and it's more about the space. It's for me.